Hi, good morning, good afternoon. This is Prateek from Shell. I lead the organization development group for the downstream function within Shell. And it's good to see some familiar faces from our Starlab days and keen to hear from Alan and the team in terms of how this has been applied.
Okay. And then Tom Donaldson, right? It's Tom? Is it Tom? Do I have the right first name? I can't remember for sure.
Tanya.
You there?
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. My name is Tanya Donaldson.
Oh, Tanya. It's Tanya.
No, yeah, don't worry. The T is just there to throw you off. So I work with John, and I'm also with Shell.
All right. All right. Did I forget anybody or miss anybody? There's one that's a telephone number. 1-831. Okay, we've got them. Oh, okay. Maybe that's the one I missed. All right. So I would like to just share one little piece of information. This first slide. Does everybody have that up now? The ecosystem design issue, as we've seen it in the literature, as we've experienced it in our own research, as we have read case study after case study to look at what's working, what isn't. We've gone on different blogs, different webinars and such to try to get a lot of intelligence from a lot of companies that are doing this, in addition to the ones we've been working with in their design process. And if you look at it, it is an organization where the white part is the organization itself, but it gets connected in its work systems to lots of other stakeholders, including customers often, including shareholders, including vendors, including partnerships of various kinds, and a lot of co-optimizing with other entities. So it could be a medical system where the primary care physicians are in an ecosystem where they're very closely connected to the hospital system and to various kinds of ancillary providers and to home care and so forth. And they're all connected and integrated through a networked operating model, and often smart reconfigurable teams to do part of the work of the organization. On the right is just the bullet points of what we have found to be important and others have in trying to create this kind of organization. And it goes right to digital because the connected, coordinated, shared platforms ultimately become the way of doing a lot of the work. It has to be governed by mutual input because to keep other organizations and partners involved in a collaborative ecosystem requires that all parties are feeling like they're benefiting in how they do their work, how they deal and deliver a value to their customers, and how they can retrieve a value from the collaboration. It requires co-design and coordination, not just governance. So there's ongoing tweaks and there's ongoing improvements and capability additions that come on, and the ecosystem really becomes a locus for thinking through what will allow the delivery of value to increase and meet the needs much better of our customers. The key management processes of creating alignment are very similar to those in a complex organization. Obviously the complexity is you're working across company boundaries and you have all kinds of company considerations, like who gets what IP and who gets what piece of the work system and how do we work together, and this has to be done with different corporate and institutional settings in mind. Transparency becomes critical because it's real easy for distrust to become more stronger than the trust that caused the groups to come together to begin with. And having a very open information system is one way to feel that they're operating for the common good. And then there is a big piece that will be dealt with in the BASF example, which is a lot of people have grown up in obviously a hierarchical organization where maintaining boundaries and keeping control internal has been the dominating set of norms, and haven't really developed the competencies to work across boundaries, sometimes even in their own organizations, which will also come out in the BASF example. So these are the things to sort of keep front and center. And we're really happy to have Alan with us today because he has actually slogged through most of these design features and success features and set up a very, very successful ecosystem set of relationships. I think he would say it isn't all the way to what it can be one day, but it is well down the pike, and there's a lot of learnings that we can extricate from that case. So I do want to turn this over to Alan, and Alan, thank you so much for making time to be with us and for rescheduling several times.
That's not a problem. Let's see if we can get a slide deck up, Alice. I don't know. Is there a way to do?
Will that do?
Let's see. I'm doing it right now. Did it come up?
It's there.
It's there?
The cover sheet.
No, Alan's.
All right.
Oh.
Yeah, there.
There?
Yeah, that was back. You need to go back. Go back to the beginning.
Back.
Yes, hopefully people see that.
Sorry.
You're going forward, Alice.
I'm going forward? I'm trying to go backwards.
You went all the way to the end.
Huh. What happened
Keep going. All right, that'll start. Oh, now you're going.
One more?
Hopefully it's not. That's.
You know, it might be
you got to go back.
because I'm not touching anything. There we go.
Yeah.
There it is.
All right, so there you go. There's the first slide. That's the cover slide. Perfect. All right. And we'll see how it goes as we go here, but hopefully everybody can see that. And I think the first comment before I introduce myself is this presentation isn't designed as a presentation. It was a little bit based on the conversation that Sue and Kathy and I had on Friday, where I put some slides in here that will help drive conversation. So feel free to interrupt. If I'm talking, yell over me, please. I want to make sure that this is a discussion and we're talking about the things that you want to talk about. But I'll take a little bit of time to introduce myself and then BASF real quickly so that it sets us up for why I did what we did at BASF. So my name is Alan Weinstein. I am the Global Key Account Manager and the Customer Network Leader at BASF with responsibility for 3M. I think many of you know 3M from many of the consumer-related products that they sell in the marketplace, anything from Post-it notes to blue painter's tape to command strips to hang your photos and all the types of things that you do in the consumer area. 3M, of course, is a much bigger company than just what they sell on the consumer side. Which is the complicating factor in dealing with them, but it gives you some perspective of where they are in the marketplace and what people know about them. I have been with BASF for 10 years, and in this role have always been responsible for the 3M account. My role has changed over the years, and we'll talk about that as I go through my slides. My background is I am a chemical engineer, and I have an MBA, a chemical engineer from Northeastern University in Boston, and an MBA from the University of Hartford. I've also worked for 2 other companies, basically. Spent my early career as an engineer, working in primarily paper coatings, et cetera, for a company, a British-based company by the name of Wrexham, and then spent quite a few years as marketing and business management with Avery Dennison before I joined BASF almost 10 years ago now. So you can go to the next slide, Alice. Wanted to share a little bit just to show the complication in how BASF is set up. This is our organizational structure. So you can see that we're divided up into 6 key businesses, and each business has a couple of divisions supporting that. So you'll see from all the way from our chemicals business at the beginning through to nutrition and care and agricultural solutions at the end, that there are a lot of things going on, almost 2, 4, 6, 8, 12, about 12 divisions overall, but each main business unit has responsibility for what they do and how they do it. And then as you look across petrochemicals, intermediates, performance materials, monomers, et cetera, those individual divisions have responsibility for selling their products. The unique factor at 3M is that of all these divisions and the responsibility, 3M buys from every one of them except for agricultural solutions and construction chemicals. So when you think about those 10 divisions from petrochemicals right through to care chemicals, it was looking at 3M and saying, well, how do we deal with them? And how should we deal with them if each individual one of these divisions is actually selling something to 3M? And how can we holistically become more organized in what we were doing? So in 2010, when I joined the company, BASF was launching a new strategy that said, hey, how do we operate as a one entity for our strategic customers? How can we become one BASF in an area where, you know, our petrochemicals business needs to be aligned with our catalyst business and dispersions and pigments and the things that were going on? And of course, that's easier said and done than done when you step back and you realize that in doing that, there are more than 20 to 25 different people calling on 3M as an individual, talking to them about what their product portfolio is, and not really caring if they're selling intermediates, what's going on in nutrition and health. And so there's this balance of how do you bring a portfolio in this diverse to a customer who's buying from all these different areas. Go to the next slide, Alice. I'll just show quickly, if you think about it, the other aspect of it is, this is last year's sales, but BASF is 65 billion euros in sales, divided up around the globe in this way. And of course, 3M is buying in all these regions around the world as well. So not only were we complicating in looking at a customer and saying, okay, we have all these divisions, we also then have to look at what's going on in each of these regions as we look across the globe in terms of supporting them. So that gives you a little bit of the sort of the setup of where we are. Any questions about BASF before I sort of launch into how we started those things? I just wanted to make sure I set the stage properly for you. Okay.
I
All right.
had one quick question too. 3M also has a lot of divisions from what I understand. So
that is correct. So 3M is actually comprised of, well, they keep changing. So over the 10 years, it's been different, but today they are 4 major businesses, each with 5 to 7 divisions associated with it. So you're probably hitting the nail on the head, which is the complicating factor in that is we're taking what's BASF's complicated business back, you know, in terms of the way we're set up, and dealing with all these divisions at 3M in a way that we've got to think about how we're strategically doing that. In the current environment of those 24 roughly divisions that they have, BASF sells something to 20 of the 24 of them. So we've, you know, got to figure out how we play in the role of industrial versus consumer, and how they divide those things up from a healthcare standpoint and where there's overlap and what's going on across various units. But it's exactly that. It's sort of this, you know, huge matrix on one side being BASF versus the huge matrix on the other side being 3M. And how can we bring that together in working to solve their problems and bring them new opportunities and innovation and handle the things that are happening. So it's a good comment in terms of the complication.
And this is Tanya. I have a question. I'm from Shell. Are you formally within BASF responsible for the whole relationship with 3M?
Yes.
Okay.
It did not start off that way.
Okay, fine.
No, I was going to say, so it did not start off that way. Yes. Okay. So this is the journey to where we are today. But yes, it's been a long process. So
I imagine.
Let's go to the next slide, and I'll be able to begin addressing that. I like this slide. This happened more midterm in our relationship, probably in the last, probably about 5 years ago, but it still speaks to what I think is what we learned at the beginning. This is Jose Varela, who at the time was their vice president of procurement, supply, whatever his title is, I think is on that slide. But his comment to us was, you know, you're really one of our top suppliers. And if you want to differentiate what you're doing here, how can you help us grow? And part of that was, okay, we need to really be thinking about how they look at suppliers, how they do things, what we can do to do something different. And I think his direction allowed us to look at a lot of different things, because it isn't always just about how do we grow our business by stealing business from our competitors. How do we help 3M grow and grow with them? So what kind of new things are we bringing to the table? What kind of opportunities are we developing that allow them to grow their business and we grow along with them? So it's just that it sort of sets the stage a little bit for what we were trying to do. Alice, if you go to the next slide, I'll begin to start to talk about our journey. Early on, when you think about what I was brought in to do, I was specifically hired to be the regional key account manager for one of those 12 divisions that were on that first slide. So my role was very distinct and separate from anything that was going on across all those businesses. It was at the time the largest business at 3M. It had the largest piece of business. But as I came in, what we realized is, of course, there were 20 other people like me talking to 3M, being around on the campus, doing things to sort of sell their products. And it was a little bit complicated in the fact that I didn't know many of them. I would run into them sometimes at a meeting or standing in an entranceway and introduce myself. But we were just this loose collection. And what we did at this time that I came in, that BASF had launched this strategy around customer networks or ideas to take strategic customers to grow with them, was we put a team together across a couple of the businesses. Kathy was actually our facilitator at that time. But what we were trying to do was understand, is there an opportunity to take this level of business that we have, that we're managing, and actually look at it and say, what can we grow it? Is there something we should be doing to try to grow it? And what the team really came up with is that we needed to be much more coordinated in our activities, and that, our share of what we were selling to 3M was minor in comparison to what some of our competitors were doing. And that what we really needed to do was think about how we can work across all these divisions and the ways that we can engage other BASF divisions to collectively and collaboratively go to 3M and approach them in a way that was much more coordinated. It was a difficult hurdle because BASF is a very siloed organization. So each one of those divisions, had their unique way that they felt they had to manage their businesses and the things that were going on, whether it was pricing, contracts, how we did deliveries, how we actually identified opportunities outside the United States, what we were doing in those engagements. And so the team itself came up with an idea that we said, okay, we need to think about how we can be more strategic and collaborative with 3M across BASF and present ourselves as one BASF. 3M is asking us to think about how to help them grow. I also I tell the story that one of the first meetings I went into at 3M when I was introduced as the regional key account manager, they immediately wanted me to be the voice of BASF. And somebody actually came to the meeting and she had a stack of about 100 BASF business cards. And she said, can I just throw these away and call you for everything that I want to do? If I have a BASF question, can you be my person? I don't ever know who to talk to at BASF. And so it sort of fed into this, we needed to be more strategic and coordinated, but we needed to get the businesses at BASF on board with the fact that we wanted to do that. And what the team came up with was this, what you see on the screen here right now, is sort of this elevator speech. And what we did with that is I went around to every division in BASF in North America, and I did a short presentation about 3M. And I talked to that division about trying to be more aligned with what we were doing. And these were the key talking points, because I needed to get them on board with the fact that I wasn't trying to take over responsibility for everything they did. I was trying to build an environment where their account managers calling on 3M could work more closely with the other BASF account managers and develop additional opportunities to grow our business together. So, basically I came into these meetings with each division head and their team, and I talked about the fact that We felt that 3M was very ambitious in what they were doing and their growth targets, and that they're really focused on how they can drive growth into their business, and where they want to do that and how they want to do that. And so we gave them all those details from a strategic standpoint. We also shared things about the fact that BASF working in this uncoordinated way meant that while we were seen as a significant supplier, we were certainly not perceived in this way due to the fragmented approach. So when you added it all up, yeah, we were a pretty good top 25 supplier to 3M, but they didn't view us that way because we had 20 different people talking to them about what was going on across that environment, and therefore they looked at us as individuals, calling on them and not the bigger picture. We also said that the team felt better about what 3M was doing from an innovation standpoint, and that we could bring them more value if we were more aligned. And so we wanted to try to do that, and that would offer us those additional opportunities in both innovation and what we call share shift, of course, stealing business from our competitors, which is a big part of growing sales as well. But to do that, we needed to be more strategic and coordinated, and we had established a position that I was named into as what we'll call now corporate key account manager. And my role was not just to take care of my division, it was to take a look across all these businesses at BASF, get those teams more coordinated, and develop a strategy to grow the business. So I'll stop right there before we move to what that team sort of looked like to take some questions if you'd like.
Alan, this is Prateek here from Shell. Two hopefully related questions. So the first one is, when you went and spoke to the divisional leadership teams, were you able at that point to be clear what was in it for them, for their division? And related to that, how did you overcome how were you not seen as a threat to them?
It's two good questions. So I think the first thing is, yes, we had begun to identify opportunities for these divisions. No, I wouldn't say that I had it down to a finite level where I could give them actual dollars or things that I was trying to do. I was trying to show a little bit of the big picture, but we could identify unique opportunities within their business that they were missing out on from some of the cross-fertilization or the cross-BU interactions. And so they appreciated that we were trying to do that. And, my ask really was two things in those meetings. One, give us a chance. Right. So that was, a little bit of let me do some work here with the team, and I think we'll be rewarded, but it's certainly something that takes time. And let us, try to move forward. The second thing was, yes, from a threat standpoint, I got initially lots of questions as it relates to, I still need to be responsible for my contracts and my pricing. And you can't give if I'm 30-day payment terms, it's not up to you to decide whether you're going to give them 60 or 90 or make those changes. And I immediately stepped back and said, no, that's not what we're trying to do. We're not trying to initially globalize or regionalize any of the activities. You will still be responsible for those, but what we're trying to do holistically is bring this group together and allow 3M to begin to see us as an organization that works together, and we can discuss those. I may come and say to you, hey, here's an interesting opportunity for our petrochemicals organization, but we need the intermediates group to do X, Y, Z with regards to thinking about how we might change a contract term with regards to a specific area. And can we do those kinds of things? But it isn't about me taking responsibility for it. It's about engaging across these functions. And I think when it was all said and done, again, the ask was, give us 18 months to try to work through this and build a team, and let us see where we can take this to. So that was really how we started it. The strategy was being driven from atop the organization. So I was given some support in that way, but it was still up to these division presidents, the level 4 type people, as we call them in our organization, to buy in and say that their people can be supportive of it. Okay. Does that answer your question, Prateek?
It does. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions before we go to the next slide? Okay, let's jump to the next slide, Alice. So this is something I stole this, I don't know, it's a quote taken from something I saw that's goes all the way back to 1996. And I just always talk about it because key account management, as everybody thinks about it, tends to be as a glorified account manager. And so we typically see these progressions where people are coming out of sales and doing things that they've always done in traditionally managing territories, always having a strategic target or an account target with multiple accounts. And this really became something that I tried to live up to with the way that I spoke to the division presidents, as well as the account managers who had responsibility for 3M. Almost every account manager that calls on 3M calls on anywhere from 10 to 2 or 3 dozen different accounts. So 3M is just one thing that they're doing. My role is 100% dedicated to 3M in terms of what I was doing. And my role was defined as a way to build a long-term relationship with a strategic customer. And it was my job to understand the depth, whom to develop special offers for, and how we can offer that differential advantage over our competitors. And that was my role, to bring that team together and identify by each of the divisions where we would prioritize, how we would work together, not deprioritizing and saying we're going to give up business, as much as how do we work together as a group. So I just sort of like this slide because it continues to talk about the fact that key account management isn't necessarily always focused on the top line. It's focused on the big picture. And I think it's important that it's an element that people think about in terms of where you're coming from or what you're doing with regards to those key accounts, because it is a much more strategic purpose as opposed to just a top line or bottom line measurement with regards to sales activity. All right, next slide, Alice. So one of the things we stepped back and did is said, well, we need lots of input at 3M. You know, we're doing a lot of things in terms of activity. So account management, as you see there at the bottom of the table, is a big part of what we do, with 20 to 25 people calling on them. But if we're really going to identify what we need to do and how we can do it with such an innovative company, we need a lot of different things that need to happen. One of the key things going on in the first year, when we talked about the woman that brought her 100 business cards, it was a period where we had just bought Ciba-Geigy. We were in the process of integrating Cognis as another acquisition, all of which were major suppliers as well to 3M. And we were having huge supply issues, how we identified supply chain, who was taking care of it, customer care issues, the number of things just in terms of the tactical awareness of how we handled 3M's business. And with 20 to 25 account managers, and with at first count, I think 10 different customer care reps talking to them, what we realized is that we were so uncoordinated that 3M didn't even know who to talk to or want to talk to anybody, because they were just thought we were, you know, absurd in the way we did business. So my first year was really spent on the bottom part of this chart, with integrating people from manufacturing and supply chain, account management, customer care there at the top, but really trying to organize the way we communicated with them. And so one of the first big changes we made was we appointed a single customer care rep to deal with all of 3M in North America. Big challenge at BASF, because that was the first place that we got pushback, where a business said, well, no, I want my customer care rep to be talking to them, because customer care doesn't know anything. That customer care person won't know anything about my products. And part of it, again, was to get in and educate these divisions about the fact that single point of contact was what 3M, our customer, was asking for, and that we would be much better in terms of what we were doing and how we were doing it if we could aggregate all those orders and things that were coming in to a person that could then go to the divisions internally and deal with any of the specific issues around making sure prices were accurate, transportation, the different pieces. What I actually started to talk about was the fact that customer care rep was a little bit like the Wizard of Oz. So we didn't actually we still had all our problems going on behind the curtain, but that single voice to the customer allowed 3M to feel like they could bring things to us, and then we dealt with all their issues as opposed to them trying to run around and call each one of these divisions and figure out who to talk to and where the products are going. So today we've evolved to a point where we have a customer care rep in North America. She sits in Charlotte. We ship products to, this year, there'll be about 75 locations in North America for 3M. And she is responsible for all the orders and the things that go on with that. Of course, we've moved to EDI now. How we're, seamlessly handling things with regards to pricing in our systems has gotten better. Those kinds of issues. But at the beginning, that was a huge win for us in the way that 3M viewed us as one organization and having that single point of contact. Over the years, it's become a great thing for me, by the way, for competitive intelligence. I learn more sometimes from talking to our customer care rep who talks to those plants and shares the information with me than what I might learn by being on the St. Paul campus and talking to some of the key procurement or technical people. So it's just another identification.
Alan, a question came in about where that person sits. Are they in a center organization, or where are they?
They actually sit, well, it changed. As everybody knows, customer care is one of those functions that sometimes marketing wants to claim, sometimes the business wants to claim, and then sometimes you decide it wants to be in a central organization. As of today, it sits within a central organization that's managed by customer care. It's a key account customer care group. And based on our success, we've added 7 more key account customer care reps for specific accounts who field, just like she does, all the businesses across BASF. We haven't gotten to a global basis yet.
Is that global or North America?
That is North America, and we're just expanding that kind of activity into our European organization, which is a huge challenge for us. And we already have it in South America. South America is handled that way, and Asia's probably going to be a couple of years till I figure out, how we service 12 countries and all the languages and the things that we're trying to do in that region, which is a little bit of a stretch for me.
So
but,
just to make sure,
certainly here,
I understand they're central, but there would be one in North America, or in the Americas. There would be one in Europe. And it's central to the region.
Central to the region, correct.
Okay.
That's a good comment. All right, so that gives you a little bit of perspective at the start that we focused a lot on, sort of these activities that made sense in terms of supply chain manufacturing and customer care, because it was a little bit about establishing that baseline, improving on the tactical elements that we were employing, and getting that up to a level that was more than acceptable to what 3M was needing and requiring to support those businesses. What we did beyond that is we then started to look at North America and say, okay, well, that's our existing portfolio of products. That's what we're doing today. We've improved that. 3M likes what we're doing. And we started to then talk about, well, how can we build a relationship with this customer across many different platforms, and begin to formalize sort of a team that will be that can support 3M. We identified things like marketing, technical service, areas of product management that became important, our R&D activities. And what we did is we began to expand little by little and add people to our team that could bring different things to the table. I'll use legal as a good example, because people are like, well, what did you do with legal? Each business unit was responsible, as I said, for their own pricing, maybe payment terms, different things that go into a contract. But every time we would go into a contract negotiation, we started over on every term. Whether, it was a 3-page contract, we had to talk about all the items that the lawyers want to put into a contract. And it seemed like we were starting over every time a division would go in to negotiate a contract. And what was happening is basically we had a bunch of what I like to call legalese that was the same. So I started a project with our legal team and engaged the 3M legal team on could we create a template that would allow somebody to say, okay, we've agreed on all the sort of legalese terms, and have a account manager come in and then only specify as an addendum the pricing, the payment terms, maybe a limitation of liability around warranty, because various products have different things that go on that you might assign as a percentage of the sales or an overall flat fixed rate. But the idea was that was what they were focused on. The account manager didn't have to worry about all the dumb terms that the lawyers like to talk about. I'm not a lawyer, so I can say they're dumb terms, but they're out there, right? And every time we went to do a contract, it became this big hurdle that we had to almost start over with. And so what we did is we created this template that allowed each division to say, okay, both lawyers, both the BASF lawyers and the 3M lawyers have agreed on these things. Let's just go in and talk about what we need to do from a, pricing, transportation, whatever those specific areas that might be unique to the environment of how we sell those products, because we ship in totes and rail cars and trucks, and there's transloading, and there's, so many different things that go on that we needed to allow some flexibility in how you discuss some things. But the general terms and conditions were pretty standard and always seemed to come out about the same. So that was a huge win for us, because we went from, sometimes 3 to 6 months of negotiating contracts to we could get things done in 30 to 45 days just based on negotiating the key payment terms and products that needed to be in there as an addendum to a sort of a template. So it wasn't a blanket global or, in terms of what was going on. We still had to go in and talk about them each time, but your terms and conditions and things were the unique things you were talking about, and you didn't have to worry about the overall agreement. So again, it was looking at things in our relationship to make it easier for us to do things together. Same thing happened on the R&D side, where we wanted to establish confidentiality agreements, and everybody jumps to, oh, well, let's have a blanket confidentiality agreement. Well, in dealing with so many divisions and so many vice presidents and people having their own ideas on how things work, we created a template for doing a confidentiality agreement that basically was something where we could drop in the specific project that was unique to what we were working on. And we went through a period where we probably had 25 to 30 at any given time confidentiality agreements going on between various businesses and divisions at 3M, so that we could work on projects together and disclose confidential information. So again, it's like trying to look at this development of what we're doing for the true empowering our group to improve the customer experience. And it was people on our team that would come up with these ideas or things that we could try to do to make it easier to do business with 3M. I'll stop there, but I've got examples of that probably in almost every one of these bullets, where how we handle EHS now, or where credit gets involved. We recently started some work around sustainability. So those types of things happened in almost every one of these by people talking and being together to say, what can we do to make it easier to do business with 3M? And we empowered this group to really bring those ideas forward.
Alan, this is Kathy. I just wanted to comment on a context setting for this stage. In the evolution of the ecosystem, which we didn't realize at the time we were creating, it was driven by customer needs and pain points in the organization that prevented us from being able to meet those needs with the customer. And that's where we had to start. Eventually, Alan will share with you how this ecosystem has evolved and grown beyond just internal to BASF. So I just wanted to set that context so you understood where we were at this point, but this isn't the whole ecosystem today.
Yeah, I just want to add something to that, which is actually this is starting already to extend into 3M, because in a way, everything you just described, Alan, is a change in the work processes that cut across you and your customers. And so, all this synergy that you're creating is really the beginnings and the foundation of a shared platform for working together.
That's a good point, and I think it's where I would go with my next
Sorry.
point in terms of what I think it's a great lead-in, Sue, because I think where this has taken us to is that we've created all these touch points in the organization. You're right. We're reaching into 3M and saying, well, would you be open to discussion about how you do that or what you do here and what's going on? And what it did is it led to two key changes in how, at this point, we began to think about our relationship and engagement with 3M. One was we realized as a very innovative company and the things that we had going on, that having multiple R&D contacts and all these different things going on across divisions, that we were sometimes leaving things on the table or not being as responsive as we could, or leading to certain developments. And what we did is we said, okay, we need a person that's smart enough to be there and engage with 3M on a regular basis, whether it's on product opportunities, whether it's on innovation opportunities, whether it's just R&D engagement. And so we hired a person that we call, he's a global technical key account manager, PhD polymer scientist, and we put him in St. Paul to be there at the Global R&D Center on a regular basis. He doesn't have an ID to get in, but he certainly wanders enough of the buildings on the campus that people know him at this point in his career. But the idea was that we were there. He's 100% dedicated to 3M. And when they have questions about products, innovation, R&D engagement, anything that's going on, they know that they can go to him first. And his job, he may not know the answer, but his job is to reach out with backwards, integrate into the BASF organization globally, and bring those things to 3M on a more regular basis and a more timely basis, so that things weren't dropped along the way. The second thing that we did at this point was we also identified that we needed to be more strategic at our executive level interactions to help drive some of the strategies we're developing. And we created what we call our joint steering team. So as a part of that joint steering team, we have two key vice presidents from BASF involved, as well as an R&D vice president. So we took two divisions that had expressed interest in what was going on at 3M, as well as an R&D person, along with myself and the global technical key account manager from BASF, and created a team that has similar engagement from the 3M side. So on the 3M side, we have senior R&D folks as part of that steering team. We have senior procurement people as part of that team. And then we also have one division vice president who's sort of there to oversee and to help engagement across many different platforms at 3M in case we need it. This team now meets twice a year. We just had the meeting actually in April. It's been going on now for 7 years. But we have met twice a year for 7 years now on the St. Paul campus. Come together, we review technical projects, we prioritize them to help make sure that things come on and off the list. We've actually included some manufacturing issues if necessary, new products that we want to introduce, how things now we're getting into global discussions. And the meeting has become something that people enjoy and feel is productive enough that in the last two meetings, we've had CTOs from both organizations participate. And that the next meeting, one of the CEOs, 3M CEO is new over the last year. He would like to come to the meeting for a bit just to understand what we're doing and how we're going to engage. So it's become this platform for us to engage at levels on things, not just day to day, future, as well as in the relationship. So what came out of our last meeting, for example, is 3M has an interest, or BASF had an interest in how 3M was managing diversity and inclusion with hiring scientists and engineers and in manufacturing. And so we asked the question of, we'd like to learn more about it. Well, what we've just set up, and it's going to happen in the month of July. In fact, I had some emails on it this morning. We've connected the chief diversity officers at both organizations. And 3M is going to host our senior vice president for HR and our chief diversity officer on their campus in St. Paul. And they're going to do a little bit of collaboration and sharing around how each organization is doing things to see what we can learn from each other and move that forward. Now, is that going to help me grow sales at the top line? I doubt it. But is it helping us from a relationship standpoint in building this organization that's empowered to help the overall customer experience, it most definitely is. The other thing that the steering team has done for us is, of course, people turn over every 1 to 2 years, depending on their roles and whatnot. And so as somebody turns over or retires, we're able to backfill that person and get them up to speed in a much quicker way in terms of what's going on. And it's become sort of exciting for somebody to come in new, because it's taken a life of its own, and people are like, oh, am I part of the steering team now that I have this role? So those are the kinds of things people want to be involved in, and it helps us to continue to develop all the different pieces across this broad platform of things happening. So I'll pause there for questions or comments on that.
This is Tanya again. I have a question. You may be coming to this, so sorry if I'm being premature with it.
No, that's fine. This is designed to be a discussion. I know what I'm coming to. Yes.
Okay, great. How did you manage things like sales targets across the various divisions? And did you ever have situations where you were talking about, potentially being willing to take a lower margin in one division in order to win business in another division, or did you keep that all very separate?
So that's a good question, because I think it's hard to manage that. So sales targets were my sales target, of course, was the overall picture as we looked at it, and I worked individually with each account manager and their manager as they set their sales target. So the division still had its own unique sales target that always rolls down from what's going on. And then we tried to roll that up into our unique overall targets. And the way that I sort of managed that and was allowed to have some input into performance was that we agreed each account manager would share what their sales target was as we rolled that up. And then at the end of each year, we would see how that measured against what they were doing. But I also then provided input on their performance relative to the team and their engagement at 3M. So I gave feedback on every member of our team to their manager. Sometimes it might be a paragraph, sometimes it might be a page. But we allowed each account manager then got some performance review that was rolled into how they performed at the customer and what they were doing. And then, of course, they were measured on their individual sales target that we agreed on. So it wasn't a perfect thing. It wasn't like I assigned sales targets. I had to sort of live within what was rolled up from the individual businesses. But that, in terms of what was happening and what was going on, how we did things to support those growth targets for each business unit, but as well as performance management type activities. Does that help a little bit? It's not as clear as it should be.
It makes perfect sense. I get it, because we dabble in this a little bit in Shell too, and so I'm very, very familiar. So that makes really good sense. Just one follow-up question to that, and now I've lost my train of thought. Sorry.
That's all right.
Oh yeah, I know. So there was one thing you were talking about. This hasn't necessarily delivered top-line growth, but certainly helps us be more customer centric. Have you done any kind of estimates of if you think this has ultimately delivered more business to you? Because presumably there is some cost to doing this additional engagement.
Correct.
At some point you do want growing the pie, right?
Right. Right. So that was always a challenge to us, right? I think I don't know whether to say that we're lucky or just good, but we have consistently delivered in many years double-digit growth at 3M. And so in terms of what we're trying to do and how we're trying to do it, the justification gets rolled up in the fact that our value to BASF as an organization and the growth that the overall business has received because of that. I haven't been able to say, 25% of our sales growth is because we're doing, we're sharing diversity and inclusion principles or whatever. So I think I don't get challenged on it from the standpoint that I think people feel that, yes, this is a company that we've been working with and we've consistently seen. You'll see on my last slide, it's since 2010, it's averaged out to 15% compounded annual growth rates. for the 10 years. And so I think as an organization, people have fallen in line to, hey, we should be doing these things because it's really helping us build our relationship without tying something like that HR engagement to an actual number. Is that, Kathy, I don't know if you have a comment on that. It might be helpful from you are sort of an HR function, but do you have any comments around how it's viewed outside of the traditional business units when we do things like this?
I think because of the success that we have had, both in terms of the relationship and the feedback from the customer experience, as well as from a bottom and top line perspective, there is a lot of credibility to this particular approach for dealing with the customer. And I think that has enabled folks to, when a challenge or an opportunity arises with 3M, you won't hear as frequently the term, well, we'll see if we can fit you in. We've got these other things going on right now. I mean, people respond to requests or are willing to participate in problem solving or be involved because there is this history of success. There was a lot of heavy lifting that had to happen in the early stages. Even for that first team, when Alan joined the company and I was facilitating, where many times people's business heads or managers would block their ability to participate in the meeting because something else came up in their business. You don't see that happening today, do you, Alan?
No, I would also add, yeah, so that's a good comment. The other thing I would add for you is that the success we've had by offering some of these additional services, so to speak, as we've rolled out what we want to do with other strategic customers besides 3M, we're using some of the things that I'm doing outside of the standard sales activity as a sort of a benchmark. And so we are trying to do similar things with other customers that have the diverse portfolio or have engagements in different ways. So it isn't just this buy and sell activity. It's how do we handle some of those things. So it's become a little bit more benchmark in a strategic way. So it's not like for every customer that we're doing it. It's like, let's look at who has a diverse portfolio, who has executive level engagement, who's managing things with the steering team, are those elements that we can put in, and then these other things start to populate behind it.
And Alan,
so it's hard though.
That relates to a question on the chat box, which was, are you doing the same thing in other global key accounts at BASF? I think you're starting to get to that. It's probably a good segue.
Yes, we are. Yeah, I'm going to start to get to that now, but yes, we are slowly starting to. So it's an element where BASF is certainly looking at this and saying, well, how should we be doing this? Is it our top 100 accounts? Is it our top 50 accounts? What are we trying to do and how can we manage it? And, part of it is we have some very large accounts, as we always talk about, that, buy one thing. Shell, we have all kinds of stuff we do with you guys, but it's not a very complicated business model, although it might be large. So how do we treat somebody that might be like a Shell versus how we treat somebody like a 3M who has this broad, diverse portfolio, and these interactions are very different. So it's a little bit of making sure you understand the business portfolio and what we're trying to accomplish and how we would roll out a similar type of profile.
Yeah, okay. And this is Kathy again, expanding on that. With the rollout of our 2025 strategy about 4 or 5 years ago, we really shifted our thinking from, okay, let's improve our customer experience and almost having a one-size-fits-all approach to that differentiation in terms of how we work with each unique customer. And the strategic customers, which, 3M most definitely is, as is Shell and others, what are they looking for and what would need to be created in terms of that partnership to strengthen that relationship and enable both businesses to grow. So
Correct.
there is a uniqueness. And so that was a major mindset shift in BASF to have, because it's all about, you know, the historically operational efficiency. And you get that from having little variation in how you do things. But little, you know, what happens with that is it creates all sorts of complexity within the system with people trying to do workarounds and fix problems. And now if you start out with what does that strategic customer need in terms of that relationship, you can eliminate or at least reduce significantly that challenge and the roadblocks that occur in working with the customer by really truly understanding the relationship, their business model, our business model in connection to it, and what is needed to drive it. And the ecosystem or the network has enabled us to operate on top of the hierarchical operating model. And, you know, we didn't go out wanting to create an ecosystem. It was really the needs of the customer and the challenges in the organization that drove us to this approach.
Perfect. All right. Alice, why don't you go to the next slide? We're going to go quickly on this one. I just wanted to say, you know, part of my job, you know, when I think about as a key account manager, I talk a lot about, you know, you got to understand the customer and how far you deep dive at the things that you're looking at, understanding what they're focused on from a global strategy. And we basically break down sort of their annual report, their investor relations report that they'll do each November. The different pieces of that are very important in terms of how we drive our strategy. So I spend a lot of time, you know, looking at things that change when they change CEOs, when they change organizational structures, when they change things around where they want to head in terms of who they're going to grow with or how they're going to grow. So these are elements that are all part of what we review with the team on a regular basis and focus on. So a good example is 3M has made a significant push those last couple of years in their healthcare space, made a huge acquisition. They announced a couple of weeks ago, actually. And so it is an area where we've shifted some of our focus and some of our resources to make sure that we're there across our product portfolio to support that. And a lot of that direction comes from us being there at the beginning when we know that they're actively working on things. And those things come out of our joint steering team where they might point those out to us. And having some of that engagement at our executive level allows us to have these people ready and doing things that are unique. The only other comment I make is that even as the 3M key account manager, people always ask, well, how much time do you spend at 3M? How much time do you do things? And it's actually kind of funny because I believe that in my role, I spend 50% of my time selling 3M to BASF people and 50% of my time selling BASF to 3M people. So there's no unique value in terms of me being 100% of my time at 3M if I'm not building bridges and creating an environment at BASF that allows me to get 3M the resources they need. And vice versa, it's taking those things that I learn about what BASF is doing and how we're doing it and making sure I'm bringing that same value to 3M. So it's a unique thing in this role that it isn't about, oh, well, why aren't you at 3M today? It's about how am I making sure that both organizations are connected strategically. So next slide. I talk a lot about what we do and how we do it as a team. And so this was a slide I had put together at one point, but you know, it really talks a lot about leading without authority. In my role, I have two people that report to me directly. So from a performance management standpoint, you know, I've got an organization of 40 people that I have access to on a regular basis from a dotted line standpoint. But ultimately, I have two people that report to me that deal with me on a regular basis in terms of performance management, expense reports, all the things you have to do in that area, but also how we set their goals and the things that I can direct that they're doing. The rest of the people that listen to me or engage with me or talk to me or come to me for advice are people that don't necessarily directly report to me, but recognize that part of my role is to connect all these people in both these organizations and coordinate those activities. So I think it's a strong, strong skill set in thinking about what you guys are calling your ecosystem, of the fact that you're not going to create an ecosystem where somebody is saying, I'm the lead necessarily, and I have direct responsibility for all this. What you've got to do is have somebody that really understands how to create a strategic partnership and lead that team as they pull it together. Good, bad, who are these people? What organizations are they coming from on both sides? And how can it take shape to connect the people in these organizations and get the opportunities flowing? So this was just the slide I pulled because we were talking about the various people that are involved. I actually have a commercial team, so all the account managers by themselves are people that I talk to more regularly. We have the sort of the overall team or the steering team that is a couple times a year. We have extended 3M Salesforce, or people like supply chain, customer care, manufacturing people that I bring in and do some things. And then, you know, as we look at our global colleagues, if we're only, I created this slide when I was focused on North America, and it's how do we bring in global colleagues? We have a plan for how we're doing global now, but this slide is a little bit older than that. So I just wanted to remind people that it isn't about creating an ecosystem that allows you to say, I've got somebody that's directing. It's a little bit of somebody that's leading and forming a team that will work collectively together. Just pause there for a second. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's really excellent, because one of the things we've struggled with in the Star Lab is how do you have networks and hierarchy going on at the same time, and you're really pointing out some of the key variables that are required to keep a network going, and it's a lot of activity and work and trust building. It's very interesting. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Maybe
go to
a
the next
question here
slide.
on this.
Yeah.
Did you have anyone challenging you and trying to take a similar role you had? Because you said there were several account managers when you started.
You know, it's interesting. When I first started, I actually had more people telling me how that, I wouldn't say congratulating me, but talking to me about what a terrible role I just took. That people hated dealing with 3M, and they were a very difficult account to handle, and they had no idea I would never be successful at what I was trying to do. So I would tell you I didn't at the time. And in fact, people thought I was crazy for even trying to do what I was doing. 3M was a very private company. BASF is a very private company. We'd hardly, as you can see, talk to each other in a way that was strategic. It was all about trading samples back and forth and maybe getting some business if we were lucky. And that might happen based on an individual account manager. But no, I think when I've got the corporate aspect of what we were doing, the job that be the bigger job, there wasn't anybody else that was interested at that time. And in fact, I think people thought I was crazy, actually. So I saw Kathy smiling when I said that. So back to the beginning.
With respect to the private company, a lot of questions have come up over the last 10 months with this group around how do you handle IP? Has that become an issue you had to overtly deal with and discuss?
Actually, I think that's my next slide. How's that?
Oh, well,
if you go to the next slide.
Another unnecessary segue.
Yes, no, it's okay. So this was when I knew that I had arrived. This was about 3 years ago. 3M created this slide and brought it to a meeting of our joint steering team and said, you know, one of the things that we need to think about is how we can create a collaboration framework, because we are very transactional. We're creating individual CDAs. You guys, you know, we're talking amongst sample exchanges, very limited dialogue in terms of that focus, even when there was a CDA. And what they wanted to try to do is say, okay, we need to figure out how to have research to research, development to development, as you'll see on the left, but how can we really exchange information on those dashed lines where the collaborative innovation is? And you can see on the right, take it from this very transactional activity, which was providing incremental growth, to a much more collaborative innovation that had some open communication and trust, and really was going to provide the sustainable high impact growth. And so, again, I remind people, as I said, I was thrilled 3M brought this to a meeting and said, we need to do a better job of collaborating because we think BASF can be a great partner for us. And so what we did based on this first shot at it was we had a meeting that we brought the CTOs from both organizations together. So ours flew in from Germany to St. Paul, and the CTO came and we spent the day together, sort of letting them understand what we were doing. We actually gave them an hour and a half to talk to each other without us being in the room. So they sort of had their little one-on-one. And then we got back together at the end of the day and they came up with 8 areas they felt that were high priority for us to collaborate in. And that they thought that instead of these individual CDAs, that the best thing for us to do was to sign a global confidentiality agreement. And they would both sign it themselves and give everybody throughout both organizations, no matter what region they were in, the capability to have open communication and trust. So we signed what for both organizations was the first document of its kind that was signed by the CTOs that it basically gave sort of this, protected us on IP. So we've got some language in there and around what we're doing, but it allows anybody in any organization to say, yes, we're operating today under the global NDA. We signed that for a year, 1 year period, just to see how it would work. And actually last quarter, we renewed it for 3 more years. And our CTO is now the CEO of BASF, and he still personally wanted to sign it. So it was something that he was committed to. And I have been in meetings with the 3M CTO where somebody's presenting and they're like, I don't know if we can share that with you. And the CTO says, nope, you can share that. We're operating under the CDA. So those are the things where everybody's committed to it. And it's taken us to a level where IP is still something we have to be careful with, but we're at least open in our communication and trusting that neither company is going to take advantage of a situation. So very unique in terms of where we are with it, but it's really what's sort of been the springboard to the next level of growth that we have. Because I think now I would say confidently, the last couple of years we were growing at more GDP rates, and we're now identifying projects. We're going to commercialize 2 big projects here by the end of the year and into 2020 that have come out of some of this high impact growth that will take us well beyond standard GDP growth. Does that answer that, Sue, a little bit?
Yes, thank you very much. That's a really wonderful solution to it. And it testifies to the amount of trust that has been created through all these different activities.
Right. Well, that's my long-term commitment, right? I mean, when you're going to do this, when you're going to think about building, key account management for strategic customers, and then to steal what you guys are talking about, this ecosystem, it's a long-term. It's not going to happen in 6 to 12 months. It's going to happen in 6 years if you're doing it the right way to build to these things. And what I'm hoping is that we've created something that's a legacy even after I move on to another position or wherever I go, that the person coming in behind me should be able to manage within an environment that's really tailor-made for innovation and growth.
Yep.
So next slide. And we're getting to the end, just so everybody. So this is a busy slide, but I wanted some of you guys have started to ask about globalization of what we're doing. And so this slide actually speaks to how we're going to begin to roll that out. And you can see over in the right-hand side where I've outlined some of the roles and responsibilities. I realize there's names on here. I would ask that you don't contact these people, but if you really had a question to contact me, I realize now that I didn't take that off. But if you think about it, what we tried to do in this slide was share what a regional network might do and what the global network is going to try to oversee in its organization. And the idea is that we're creating a regional network in the eyes of what we did in North America that brought us success. 3M continued over the years to come to our joint steering team and say, you guys are awesome here in North America. The growth is great. The support we get is great. How come you can't do that for us in Europe? How come you can't do that for us in Asia? And so what we've said is part of our charter here is to take sort of that benchmark North America and do things in these other regions that gives 3M the activity and the support that they need to help continue to, as you can see under customer proximity on the left-hand side where we use the term global. So we're giving them what they need on a global basis by managing some of that globally. And we've created a team, as you can see, that has me as the global network lead, but I have an executive level sponsor. So it's our global executive team. Teresa is actually our president for the North American organization, is my global sponsor. And then we have assigned somebody like myself. I'm still the regional network for North America, of course, and we've added people in each region to take on the responsibility of leading a regional network with my direction and support. So for example, we've had a couple of meetings in Europe now, and I just came back from Ludwigshafen, where we did an internal meeting, and then I actually took the customer network to 3M's European headquarters in Langenthal, which is about Switzerland, which is about 45 minutes south of Basel. But I went with them and we introduced him and we talked about the priorities and what we're trying to do in Europe. I've got the same plan for Maggie Yu in the third quarter here in Asia. I'm going to be headed over to deal with one of her team meetings, and then we're going to go visit both in Shanghai and Singapore, where 3M has headquarters in the APAC region. So what we're trying to do is roll this idea out with the support of our management, and having a GET sponsor, as we call it, Global Executive Team sponsor, will help us to take these strategic pillars that we've outlined around customer proximity, innovation partner, and differentiated services, and begin to build on that. I will remind you, as I said at the beginning of this, the key in each one of these regions is fixing all our tactical issues. So do we have supply problems? Do we have manufacturing quality issues? How do we handle customer care? What are each one of these account managers? And so we know it's a process, and we're not going to get to where we are in North America right away, but we needed to start to knock down some of those silos and begin to focus on these pillars of strategic growth. So it is now started. This started back in September of 2018 was where I initially began to roll this out. And like I said, we've done Europe, and has started in the fourth quarter. Asia started in this quarter, and we're going to continue to carry things forward into South America, et cetera.
Something that I think is clear from this chart, but I'd really like to pull it out because it's another area where I've gotten lots of questions from people, is to do that, you have a network at the global level, and then each region has to have its own network, and there's not a one size fits all necessarily. Certainly there's not an assumption that they're all at the same place in the journey. Those will probably look a little different for one another, and given the shape and the nature of the business in the region.
That is correct. And you hope, what we hope is that some of the benchmark activities from successful regions will transfer, but that's going to, so I'll give you a good example is Europe is actually coming together very similar to North America, but it's also because 3M operates in a very similar way there. APAC has become much more difficult because we have 12 countries that we ship to, multiple languages. Is customer care is easy to do centrally, or do we keep things happening in a country? So we're starting to understand, well, what do we need to do different in APAC that maybe isn't going to match up exactly what we did in North America or Europe, and learn from that. So it becomes something that comes together in different ways, but that regional network leader is beholden still to the overall strategy and can have input and help us with some of the implementation locally. So that comes back to the global comment.
Right.
Okay. I would say one other comment is that in terms of building a relationship in those regions is what's going to become important, right? So while a lot of the work is happening, but they're going to have to work cooperatively. I've got cooperatively steer on my innovation partner, but it is a little bit about the cooperation within that region and what we're building with 3M as well. So.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I think this is my next slide is my last slide, if I recall. Yes. It's just a summary slide of the snapshot, but talk about the fact here that there are 10 ODs of those 12 that sell something. The other thing within BASF is each one of those ODs that I talked about has multiple strategic business units within it. So just like I talked about 3M having 6 or 7 divisions in each of their business units, we cut our ODs. So we've got those 6 businesses that have 12 ODs, and then each OD has 5 to 7 strategic business units in it. So globally, we have about 75 to 80 strategic business units. 3M buys something from 42 of those 80 strategic business units. We really don't have any customer that can say that they're that broad and diverse. It is one of the more unique customers in BASF and makes it interesting to handle, to say the least. Last year, 3M bought 480 different BASF products across those divisions. We've started to build sustainability into what we're doing. So we talk about accelerators and promoters and things within that environment as we continue to think about challenge products. Challenge products are the ones that, you know, we need to think about taking out of the system to help from a global, whether it's climate change, whether it's sustainability, where we're headed with things. We ship to 4 regions, 25 countries. Last year, we shipped to 133 locations around the world. And since 2010, our sales have basically been about a 15% compounded annual growth rate. We've gone, I mean, we are I told you we were probably top 25 when we started. We're a top 3 supplier to 3M right now globally. And even in BASF, when you think about where we were, I mean, BASF is $65 billion. So it's got a lot of big customers, as you can imagine. But 3M is in that top 100 customers for BASF at this point, based on what we're doing in the visibility. So just give you that snapshot at the end. And
Any
I think
last
that's it.
questions or comments? Alan, something you said made me think that we could share these slides. We'd be happy to get the names off of that slide.
So let me go back. Some of what's on here could be considered confidential. I tried to take out lots of numbers per se, but let me go back and take a look at them and see what I can make sure is cleansed enough for you to share with the group.
Okay. And we will get out.
And I would say the other comment would be, I'm happy. I mean, if you want to contact me separately with questions, or you can find me on LinkedIn as well, of course. But I'm happy to sort of do things a little one-on-one if it means that I could share a little bit more, maybe not in writing, but verbally. That would be okay too.
Thank
no problem
you.
if people want to reach out.
Kathy, any last comments from you?
Well, I just have a question. Based on what you were talking about in the community of practice and the questions you folks had, does this help advance your thinking and answer some of the questions you had?
So this is Pratik here. Let me take a stab at that. It demystifies things. Which is really nice, because you kind of hear this ecosystem word and you think, I'm not quite sure what it is. But the way Alan's told the story, I think is really helpful to see the journey, but then also some of the choices you've made along the journey in terms of starting with frictions, in terms of working with the divisional presidents, in terms of setting up the technical account manager, the steering team. I mean, these are nice, simple, practical things, but done at the right time in the right way really help bring it to life. So that's what I took away, certainly.
Okay, good.
I think that's a really good comment, Pratik. Because I think somebody might say, oh, here's all the things we've done that have been successful, so we need to go do that at this strategic customer if we're going to create this ecosystem. And I stress it's a journey. It was putting the joint steering team in place at the right time. If we had approached them too early about that, they might have laughed at us. We couldn't even ship them products on time. So again, it is a journey, and it's saying, okay, these are elements that can work, but the timing around how you put them into place is important.
One last question from me, if I may. With the way that the overall relationship has grown, how much effort, if any, have you had to put into how does this growth get allocated, if that's the right word, back into the divisions and the SBUs so that the credit sits in the right place, if you know what I mean?
Well, there's two things that happen. One is the divisions still hold their sales,
Right.
so they'll see the sales growth. We break down the innovation pipeline based on whether it's an R&D activity or a specific OD activity. So they're involved in terms of seeing where those things are happening. And then the third thing is they want to see that because my group, which is a couple of people, as I talked about, all of our expenses and salaries, et cetera, are allocated across those divisions. So they pay a percentage of what we're doing now. So I'm no longer just a pigments and dispersions person or surfactants. You know, my role is such that it's seen as something that everybody pays for collectively and is agreed to. And that's not just done by sales, that's done by activity. So, you know, I actually had a business unit come and say, hey, how come we're not getting more activity? We want you guys working harder for us. And so we allocated more time to them that year and they paid for it. But that was something that they requested.
Nice. But the category groups, they sit centrally across BASF, across all these divisions. Is that fair?
When you say the category, I'm not sure if I'm clear on
your kind of roles, the account manager.
So that's some do. For whatever reason, I've actually still report into the original division that hired me. And I think it's just because the president actually likes me being there. And I actually have a couple of other roles. I'm helping roll out the key account management in that one division a little bit on how we can do. So I report into one division and not centrally. I could envision that that's going to probably change in the coming years as we have more people like me. 3M is the first company, I will point out, that we're truly taking this step where they operate in every region of the world. So there is probably a long-term plan of 3 or 4 other pilots that we'll be doing this year. And I think over time it will go to a central role. But right now it's unique still.
Thank you.
And early on, that wasn't the case in terms of Alan's role being allocated across the businesses. He was housed in one of those divisions and being paid for by that division because he
100%, yes.
That particular organization had the largest percentage of sales to 3M. But just like the whole evolution of this ecosystem, that role and how it got paid for evolved based on the maturity of the ecosystem and what was needed in the organization. What hasn't changed, though, is, and that's sort of the connection between the ecosystem and the operating, hierarchical operating system. The sales plans and targets are done within the individual silos. And the revenue or sales volumes are dependent upon what they sell to 3M. But what they do is they come out of that hierarchy into this ecosystem to create the overall plans, which are somewhat driven by what is expected in each of the operating divisions. But from a strategy perspective, in terms of how we show up at the customer at 3M or any of our other strategic customers, is worked on and agreed to and aligned within the ecosystem. So there's, you know, that constant communication and connection between the two. We aren't placing our hierarchical operating system by the ecosystem. We're using the ecosystem to enable us to overcome hurdles and respond more agilely and quickly to our customer, which we would not be able to do if everybody operated in those silos.
And I hate to interrupt, but we actually are past our time. And I
Whoops.
really want to thank Alan and Kathy for making this possible and sharing this information. I think it's a really interesting story. We will get from Star Lab, I will get an email out to you telling you how to access all this information, and also asking you whether you want to continue with periodic webinars of this type when interesting cases emerge that people would like to share or learn from, and your thoughts about how to continue this dialogue. And I really appreciate your being on today. Pratik, thank you for sticking with us and being encouraging throughout, especially Pratik, who I think had energy, a whole lot of energy for this topic. And Star Labs appreciates it too. Thank you. And I think we'll say goodbye.
All right. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Ellen, Kathy,
This
great.
was phenomenal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Okay, bye.
To everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye.